Hey guys, what's up? This is Pat from 12-Bit Soul, and today I'm going to talk to you about the exciting updates in Logic Pro 10.5, at least one of them. My personal favorite so far, the step sequencer. And also, while we're at it, we'll use the new Arturia OB Xa V, the really nice replication of one of the most famous analog polysynths. And we'll use them together to just make a quick sequence and show you some of the features that you can do with automation, not just the notes in the sequence, but also some cool things you can do with using a soft synth and sequencing its parameters. So let's dig into it. First, I'll just let you hear the little sequence I've done. So first, really quick, I'll dig into the quick patch I made with the OB Xa V. If you haven't checked this out yet, you should try the demo. And there's also really good deals on upgrades if you have the V Collection 7. So check it out. But to start with, I just did simple using both oscillators here. I did simple sawtooth. And just to note, to be able to hear oscillator 2, by default, this knob is turned down. So I've turned that up. I've done some mild modulation. That's about at 12 o'clock default. I've done a little bit of modulation with the filter. Here, set the frequency low and a little bit of resonance. Put it on 4-pole to make it a little bit smoother, and then key tracking, so as it goes up in pitch, you'll notice the filter open up more. So I've also made the attack on the filter envelope delay a little bit, and a little bit of release, a bit of sustain. And the biggest source of modulation that you'll hear in this sound, first off, is a bit of LFO modulation to oscillator 2 frequency and filter cutoff. So what I also did here, there's two great modes to deal with the stereo image. There's the stereo mode, which is conveniently right here, and you can do some further accentuation of the stereo field via oscillator, filter, and LFO. And you can see these dials. I've dialed some of those in, brought those in quite a bit. You can see the amount and rate as well. And this can help give it a wider sound. And in this case, something that another great thing Arturia does is accentuate and do things that the original hardware could not do. And here they've done some things that stereo filter work that are fantastic and I think sound great. Your other option here is something that in hardware synths that I use, things like the Prophet and so forth, and probably the original Oberheim if I'm not mistaken, panning of individual voices, which is here. And you can see these dials. It's for the 8 voices, and you can pan them left and right. You can keep some center, etc., and it gives a natural separation and isolation of notes in the spectrum that is not. It's distinctly different than typical like stereo hard panning or unison voicing. So it's a really cool thing to be able to do in a soft synth, and I'm glad they did that. In this case, I opted for the stereo, and I also opted for unison and a little bit of detune with down here at the bottom. I've done 4 voices of unison. I didn't want it quite too thick, but I did want to thicken it up some and detune it just a little bit. So that's a main modulation I did on the main page. Next, and this is something that's very powerful in the soft synth that can't be done with the hardware, is some modulation, graphic modulation, which I think is in high demand in modern production. And they have all these wonderful different presets that you can choose from, and I believe you might even be able to save some of your own shapes. But you have quite a range of things that you can modulate, and of course you can set it to loop or key trigger. Key trigger means that the loop begins every time when you press down the key. Poly means that it's doing it for the individual keys and voices being played. I've turned those off so that it just keeps a steady rhythmic pace with the tempo, sync to the tempo in this case. Here you can see there's quite a few things. There's dozens of assignments. And here I did LFO amount to accentuate those filter and oscillator 2 changes, but on a slow pace. And then, so it's sort of evolving. And here we've got chorus, dry, wet. And that's one of the effects. And there's some great effects to choose from here. Great sounding reverb delays, phaser overdrive, bit crusher, and I'll show you next what I've done with bit crusher in Logic Step Sequencer. So that pretty much sums up what I did with OB Xa. And let's take it down here to the Step Sequencer. And the Step Sequencer, at default, without the information, the I button, and this is what you see. In order to create a new sequence up in the sequence here, you have the option of create MIDI pattern or create pattern region. You want to create pattern region, so I created an empty pattern region, and then to have some control in here, went to I, and I set the step rate at 8th note, 16 steps, no swing, and then this is something very powerful that I like, is the scale quantize. And so I put it in natural minor, and at default you start with 8 notes for the step sequencer. I know people also use this for drum patterning and so forth as well, and so I think Logic decided to keep it at 8 and not like a full several octaves for musical things. You can also, in functions, the default is, I believe, C2 or C3. I brought it up to C3 by transposing 1 octave, and then individually I changed some things here as well. So C3 to C4 is what we have. And so we have that sequence. Of course, as well, I want to point out that this playback is not like your standard MIDI sequence because of these arrow directions, if you haven't explored this yet. So some of these you can set to go forward or backwards and forward. And in this case, so most of these are forward. I'm just keeping it consistent. You can also change the individual note, the speed at which it goes, 8th note, 16 notes, etc. And you can also shift them around from when they begin, the sequence of the order of the notes. What I wanted to point out here, what you can add is also effects modulations and pretty much any parameter that's available in a soft synth. In addition, if you have hardware synth and want to do MIDI CC, there are all those options as well. It's pretty deep. You can see MIDI CC here. If you have your implementation documentation from your hardware synth, you can get pretty wild into really cool rhythmic animated sequences of parameters that even if your hardware synth has a step sequencer of some sort, it may not have this sort of flexibility. So super cool. In this case, I went down to OB Xa and I selected the Bit Crusher FX2 downsample rate. And you'll see you have two things. You've got step, whether it's on or off, and that's these, as you can see. And then the value, whatever that value may be. And in this case, it's the downsample rate. And so I drew in all these, and I decided to have it go through every single step, but you can have them off. However, certain things that will just hold the value of the step before. So if you've got it, let's say it, this value here, and you took out this step, it would here. Let's go there. It would continue that value until it reached the next value. So it's really a bit of experimentation, but a lot of fun results can happen from it, and I think in this case it sounded good, and was able, especially with scale quantize, to get a really nice little melody pattern going pretty fast. And you can also start, the fun thing you can do next with these step sequences is then you can, in addition, resample these and manipulate, especially now that we have the quick sampler and so forth. So you can take this basic sequence that I've done, do variations on the fly while you're recording it with all these different parameters. You can start switching things back and forth if it's just going forward, etc., etc., and it's a great, great creative tool. So I hope you guys start to explore this. Both of these, the OB Xa V, I think, is one of the best ones they've released. Their engines just get better and better, and I'm so happy that Logic Pro 10.5 has brought so many great features, and this one has been a high demand thing for a lot of modern producers. So let's all enjoy it, and I'm just going to ride out with the sequence.